The sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky outpost in Afghanistan's Helmand province. Sergeant Maria Gonzalez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her equipment in the makeshift command post. The year was 2012, and the war had been dragging on for over a decade. What started as a routine patrol had turned into something much more dangerous. Maria wasn't supposed to be there. As a logistics coordinator, her job typically kept her safely behind the wire, managing supply chains and equipment distribution. But when Staff Sergeant Johnson twisted his ankle during their morning patrol, someone had to take his place on the observation mission. The unit was already short-staffed, and Captain Rodriguez needed every available person. The outpost sat on a strategic hill overlooking a valley that had become a notorious smuggling route for Taliban fighters. Intelligence reports suggested that a large group of insurgents was planning to move through the area within the next 48 hours. The mission was simple: observe, report, and if necessary, engage hostile forces threatening coalition positions. Maria had grown up in a small Texas town where hunting was as common as Friday night football. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle properly. By the time she was 16, she could hit a tin can at 300 yards with iron sights. But military combat was different from hunting deer in the Texas Hill Country. The Marine sniper team had arrived the previous evening. Corporals Mitchell and Davis were experienced marksmen with multiple deployments under their belts. They had set up their position on the northern ridge, about 800 meters from the suspected infiltration route. Their Barrett M82 rifles were zeroed and ready, equipped with high-powered scopes that could pick out individual faces at extreme distances. "Looks like we might have a quiet day," Mitchell had said as he scanned the valley through his scope. The landscape appeared empty except for a few scattered goats grazing near an abandoned compound, but appearances could be deceiving in this part of Afghanistan. Maria checked her radio equipment one more time. Communication was critical for this operation. Any movement in the valley needed to be reported immediately to the forward operating base, where Apache helicopters stood ready to provide close air support if things went sideways. The first sign of trouble came at 13:47 hours. Maria spotted movement through her binoculars near the old stone bridge that crossed the dry riverbed. At first it looked like civilians, but something felt wrong. The figures were moving too deliberately, keeping to cover in a way that suggested military training. "I've got movement, Sector 7, she radioed to Mitchell's position. "Copy that. We see them too," came the reply. "Looks like maybe 6 individuals. Hard to get a clear count." As the minutes passed, more figures appeared. What had started as a small group was clearly something much larger. Maria counted at least 20 armed men moving through the valley in tactical formation. They were well-equipped and disciplined. Definitely not the typical ragtag insurgent group they usually encountered. "This is bigger than we expected," Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "How many do you count?" Maria swept her binoculars across the valley systematically. The insurgents had spread out, using natural cover and moving in coordinated bounds. Professional soldiers would have been impressed by their tactical discipline. "I count 23 confirmed, possibly more in the tree line," she reported. "They're moving toward grid reference 41SMD 12345 67890. That grid reference made everyone nervous. It was the location of a small Afghan National Army checkpoint about 2 kilometers away. The checkpoint was manned by only 8 soldiers, and they had no idea what was heading their way. Mitchell's voice came over the radio, tense but controlled. "We have clear shots on multiple targets, requesting permission to engage." There was a pause as Captain Rodriguez consulted with higher command. Rules of engagement required positive identification of hostile intent before firing. The insurgents hadn't yet fired on coalition forces, but their movement toward the checkpoint strongly suggested an impending attack. "Permission granted," came the response. "Engage at will. Priority targets are any individuals with RPGs or heavy weapons." Maria watched through her binoculars as Mitchell took his first shot. The distinctive crack of the Barrett rifle echoed across the valley. She saw the muzzle flash from the sniper position, but the target in the valley continued moving. "Miss," Mitchell reported, frustration evident in his voice. "Wind's stronger than expected down there." Davis took the second shot 30 seconds later. Again, Maria saw the muzzle flash, but the insurgent Mitchell had been targeting Dove behind a boulder, apparently unharmed. "Another miss," Davis confirmed. "These guys know we're here now. They're scattering." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The element of surprise was gone, and the insurgents were adapting quickly to the sniper threat. Some had taken cover behind rocks and abandoned structures, while others were advancing aggressively toward the checkpoint. "Apache flight is inbound, ETA 15 minutes, Captain Rodriguez announced. "But those ANA soldiers don't have 15 minutes. Maria could see the checkpoint through her binoculars. The Afghan soldiers had taken defensive positions, but they were clearly outnumbered and outgunned. Smoke was already rising from the compound, suggesting that RPG rounds were finding their targets. Mitchell attempted a third shot at a fighter carrying what appeared to be an RPG launcher. The round struck the ground several feet to the left of the target. The Barrett rifles were incredibly accurate weapons, but the combination of wind, heat shimmer, and the stress of combat was affecting the Marines' normally excellent marksmanship. "We need to do something," Maria said into her radio. "Those ANA guys are getting hammered." She had been watching the tactical situation develop, and an idea was forming in her mind. The insurgents had clustered in a narrow section of the valley, using an old irrigation ditch for cover. It was good tactical thinking on their part, but it might also present an opportunity. About 200 meters behind the main group of insurgents, Maria had spotted something interesting through her binoculars. An old fuel truck sat abandoned near the ruins of a gas station. The truck appeared to be leaking, with dark stains visible on the ground around it. If that truck still contained fuel, and if someone could hit it with the right kind of ammunition— "Mitchell, Davis, can you see that fuel truck at grid 41S MD 112-340-67885? She asked over the radio. "Affirmative," Mitchell replied. "What are you thinking?" Maria explained her observation about the potential fuel spill around the truck. The insurgents were positioned between the truck and the checkpoint, mostly in the irrigation ditch that ran directly from the truck toward their targets. If that truck goes up, and if there's really fuel spilled around it, the explosion might create a chain reaction down that ditch, she said. "But it would have to be a really precise shot." "We can try," Davis said, "but we're not hitting much of anything right now. This wind is killing us." Maria looked at her own rifle, an M4 carbine that was standard issue for her logistics role. It wasn't a precision weapon like the Marines' Barrett rifles, but it was familiar. She had carried a similar rifle during her basic training and had qualified as an expert marksman. "Mind if I borrow your rifle?" she asked Mitchell over the radio. There was a pause before Mitchell responded. "You want to borrow what now?" "Your Barrett. I think I know what's wrong with your shots, and I might be able to help." The request was highly irregular. Maria wasn't a trained sniper, and the Barrett M82 was a specialized weapon that required extensive training to use effectively, but desperate times called for creative solutions. "Sergeant, are you qualified on the Barrett?" Captain Rodriguez's voice cut into the conversation. Maria hesitated for a moment before answering. "Not officially, sir, but I grew up shooting, and I think I understand what's happening with the wind down there." From her position, Maria had a different angle on the valley than the Marine snipers. She could see how the wind was behaving differently at various elevations, creating the complex air currents that were throwing off the Marines' shots. Her hunting experience had taught her to read wind patterns, and she thought she could compensate for what she was observing. "This is highly irregular," the captain said. "But those ANA soldiers are running out of time. Mitchell, what's your assessment?" Mitchell's response came after a long pause. "Sir, If Sergeant Gonzalez thinks she can make the shot, I'm willing to let her try. We're not doing any good up here right now. The decision was made. Maria would leave her position and move to the sniper team's location on the northern ridge. It would take her about 10 minutes to cover the distance, assuming she didn't run into any enemy patrols. As she gathered her equipment, Maria could hear the firefight intensifying in the valley below. The ANA checkpoint was under heavy assault, and small arms fire was echoing off the rocky walls of the valley. Time was running out, and everything depended on a logistics sergeant who had never fired a shot in anger. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she began moving toward the sniper position. In a few minutes, she would either save 8 Afghan soldiers or watch them die while she missed the most important shot of her life. The Barrett rifle that Mitchell was offering represented both opportunity and enormous pressure. Maria had asked to borrow the rifle, but what she was really asking for was the chance to prove that sometimes the most unlikely person could make the most crucial difference. As she climbed toward the sniper position, the sound of gunfire continued to echo through the valley, counting down the seconds until her moment of truth. Maria reached the sniper position breathing hard from the climb. Mitchell and Davis had created an excellent firing position among the rocks, with clear sight lines across the valley and good protection from return fire. The Barrett M82 rifle lay ready on its bipod, looking massive compared to her familiar M4 carbine. "Show me what you're seeing," Mitchell said, handing her his spotting scope. "The wind down there is doing something weird." Maria studied the valley through the high-powered optics. She could see the dust patterns, the movement of vegetation, and most importantly, the way smoke from the burning checkpoint was behaving at different elevations. Her father's lessons came flooding back. "You're compensating for surface wind, but there's a thermal layer about 50 feet up," she explained. "The valley floor is creating updrafts that are pushing your rounds high and to the left. You need to aim low and right of your intended target." Davis nodded slowly. "That makes sense. The heat signature is definitely showing thermals." Maria positioned herself behind the Barrett rifle. The weapon was heavier than anything she had ever fired, and the scope was far more sophisticated than the simple hunting scopes she was used to. But the fundamentals were the same: breath control, trigger squeeze, and reading the environment. "Range to target?" she asked. "Fuel truck is 847 meters," Mitchell replied, consulting his range finder. "Wind speed at our elevation is 8 to 10 knots from the southwest." Maria adjusted the scope and studied the target. The old fuel truck sat exactly where she had spotted it, with the dark stains around its base that suggested leaked diesel or gasoline. The insurgents were still using the irrigation ditch for cover, positioned perfectly between the truck and the checkpoint. "What kind of ammunition are we using?" she asked. "Armor-piercing incendiary," Davis answered. "If that truck has any fuel left in it, this should light it up." The sound of gunfire from the checkpoint was getting more intense. Through the scope, Maria could see muzzle flashes from the ANA position, but they were clearly being overwhelmed. One of the buildings in the compound was now fully engulfed in flames. "Apache flight is still 12 minutes out," Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Whatever you're going to do it fast." Maria settled into her firing position, feeling the weight of the Barrett against her shoulder. The rifle's recoil would be much stronger than anything she was used to, but she had to trust her training and instincts. She aligned the crosshairs on the fuel truck, then adjusted her point of aim based on her wind reading. "On target," she announced. "Wind call?" Mitchell asked, following standard sniper protocol. "Hold low right. Approximately 2 minutes of angle," Maria replied. She controlled her breathing, letting half the air out of her lungs before settling into her natural respiratory pause. The crosshairs steadied on her adjusted aim point, just below and to the right of the fuel truck's tank area. The trigger on the Barrett was surprisingly smooth. Maria applied steady rearward pressure, feeling the rifle's mechanism reaching its breaking point. Everything seemed to slow down as she focused on the fundamentals her father had drilled into her years ago. The rifle fired with a tremendous roar that echoed across the valley. The recoil was massive, much stronger than Maria had expected, but she managed to maintain her position and watch the bullet's impact through the scope. For a moment, nothing happened. The armor-piercing round struck the fuel truck with a metallic clang that was audible even at 800 meters. Maria began to think she had missed, or that the truck was empty. Then the world exploded. The fuel truck erupted in a massive fireball that sent black smoke billowing hundreds of feet into the air. But that was just the beginning. As Maria had hoped, there was indeed spilled fuel around the truck, and the explosion ignited it instantly. The fire raced along the ground, following the path of leaked fuel and spreading much faster than anyone had anticipated. The old irrigation ditch, which the insurgents had been using for cover, became a river of flame as the fire followed the fuel trail directly toward their positions. "Holy shit," Davis breathed, watching the scene unfold through his spotting scope. The insurgents, who had been hidden in the ditch, suddenly found themselves trapped in a corridor of fire. Those closest to the fuel truck were caught completely off guard, while others further away had seconds to react. Some tried to climb out of the ditch, exposing themselves to potential sniper fire. Others attempted to run along the ditch toward the checkpoint, but the flames were moving faster than they could. Maria watched in amazement as the fire continued to spread. What she had thought might be a small fuel spill was apparently much larger, possibly connected to underground storage tanks from the old gas station. The flames were following multiple paths, creating a network of fire that trapped the insurgents in an increasingly small area. "Target neutralized," she reported over the radio, though the phrase seemed inadequate for what was happening in the valley below. The tactical situation had been completely reversed in a matter of seconds. The insurgents, who had been advancing confidently on the checkpoint, were now fighting for their survival. Some were retreating toward the hills, while others were trapped by the spreading fires. "Sergeant Gonzalez, what exactly did you hit?" Captain Rodriguez asked over the radio. "The fuel truck, sir. But there was apparently a lot more fuel down there than we realized." Through the scope, Maria could see the ANA soldiers at the checkpoint taking advantage of the chaos. They were moving out of their defensive positions and beginning to engage the scattered insurgent forces. The tactical balance had shifted dramatically in their favor. Mitchell was studying the scene through his spotting scope, shaking his head in amazement. "In 15 years of doing this job, I've never seen anything like that. How did you know?" Maria lowered the Barrett rifle and looked at the Marine sniper. "I didn't know. I just thought maybe there was fuel around that truck and maybe it would burn if we hit it. I had no idea it would do all that." The fire in the valley was still spreading, but it was beginning to run out of fuel. The initial massive explosion had given way to smaller fires scattered across the area. Most importantly, the immediate threat to the checkpoint had been eliminated. Apache flight. "This is ground control," Captain Rodriguez radioed to the incoming helicopters. "Be advised, we have a large fire in the target area. Most hostile forces have been neutralized or scattered." Davis was counting the insurgents visible in the valley. "I see maybe 6 or 7 still moving. The rest are either down or have retreated." "Apache flight copies. We have visual on the fire. That's quite a light show down there. How did you manage that?" Maria listened to Captain Rodriguez explain the situation to the helicopter pilots. She was still processing what had just happened. One shot from a borrowed rifle had eliminated most of a 20-plus person insurgent force and saved 8 Afghan soldiers. But as the immediate adrenaline began to wear off, she realized that what she had just done would have consequences beyond the tactical situation. The explosion had been much larger than anyone had anticipated, and the fire was still burning across a significant portion of the valley. "Sergeant," Mitchell said, "I don't know what they taught you in logistics training, but that was the most effective single shot I've ever seen fired in combat. Maria looked back through the scope at the continuing fires in the valley. She had asked to borrow Mitchell's rifle, hoping to make a small difference in the firefight. Instead, she had created what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about incidents of the entire deployment. The ANA soldiers at the checkpoint were now in full control of their sector. The insurgent attack had been completely broken, and the survivors were retreating toward the Pakistan border. The immediate crisis was over, but Maria knew that the paperwork and debriefings were just beginning. "Apache flight requesting permission to engage remaining hostiles," came the radio call. "Permission granted. Be careful of that fire." As the helicopters began their attack runs on the scattered insurgents, Maria carefully safed the Barrett rifle and handed it back to Mitchell. She had borrowed it for one shot, and that shot had changed everything. The logistics sergeant, who wasn't supposed to be there, had just pulled off one of the most spectacular single shots in recent military history. But she was already thinking about the investigation that would follow, the questions that would be asked, and the explanations she would have to give. What had started as a routine observation mission had become something that would be discussed in military circles for years to come, and it all began with a simple request. "Mind if I borrow your rifle?" The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman was packed with more brass than Maria had ever seen in one place. Colonel Harrison, the base commander, sat at the head of the table flanked by intelligence officers, operations specialists, and a Navy JAG lawyer whose presence made everyone uncomfortable. It had been 3 days since what the intelligence reports were now calling the fuel truck incident. The explosion and subsequent fire had been visible from satellite imagery, and everyone from division headquarters to the Pentagon wanted to know exactly what had happened in that valley. Maria sat across from the assembled officers, still wearing her logistics uniform and feeling completely out of place. Captain Rodriguez sat beside her, along with Mitchell and Davis from the sniper team. The Afghan National Army had sent their own representative, Lieutenant Colonel Ahmadi, who spoke perfect English and had been asking pointed questions about operational procedures. "Let's go through this one more time," Colonel Harrison said, consulting a thick file of incident reports. "Sergeant Gonzalez, you're telling us that you fired one round from a Barrett M82 rifle, and it resulted in the elimination of approximately 100 insurgent fighters?" The number had grown with each retelling. Initial reports had mentioned 23 confirmed insurgents, but the post-incident investigation had revealed evidence of a much larger force. Body count was difficult to determine due to the extensive fire damage, but intelligence estimates now suggested that the insurgent group had been significantly larger than anyone had realized. "Sir, I fired one round at a fuel truck," Maria replied carefully. "The explosion was much larger than expected, and the fire spread beyond anything we anticipated." The JAG lawyer, Commander Peterson, leaned forward. "Sergeant, did you have specific intelligence about fuel storage at that location?" "No, sir. I observed what appeared to be fuel stains around an abandoned truck and made a tactical decision based on the immediate threat to friendly forces," Lieutenant Colonel Ahmadi spoke up. "The checkpoint you protected was my nephew's unit. 8 of our soldiers owe their lives to your actions, but we are curious about the extent of the damage." The extent of the damage was indeed remarkable. Subsequent aerial reconnaissance had revealed that the fire had burned across nearly 10 square kilometers of the valley. The old gas station had apparently been connected to a network of underground storage tanks that had been abandoned but not emptied when the facility was closed years earlier. "The environmental impact assessment is still being conducted," said Major Williams from the intelligence section. "But preliminary findings suggest that the underground fuel storage was much more extensive than our maps indicated." Colonel Harrison studied Maria carefully. "Sergeant, your personnel file indicates that you're a logistics coordinator with no formal sniper training. How did you know to make the specific adjustments to compensate for the wind conditions that had been affecting the Marine snipers?" Maria had been dreading this question. The truth was that her success had been part skill, part luck, and part intuition developed during years of hunting in Texas. But military leaders liked concrete explanations for tactical successes. Sir, I grew up hunting in an area with similar thermal conditions. I observed the wind patterns and heat signatures in the valley and applied civilian hunting experience to the tactical situation. Captain Rodriguez added, Sergeant Gonzalez had the best observation angle to assess the wind conditions. The sniper team's position was excellent for concealment but limited their ability to read the air currents. Mitchell nodded in agreement. Sir, Sergeant Gonzalez's wind call was exactly right. Her shot placement was perfect for the conditions. Commander Peterson was still focused on the legal implications. Were you aware that the use of a weapon system for which you are not formally qualified could result in charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice? The room went quiet. Everyone knew that Maria's actions had been heroic and tactically brilliant, but the military was a bureaucracy that valued following proper procedures above almost everything else. Sir, Captain Rodriguez interjected, Sergeant Gonzalez was acting under direct orders from myself and with the explicit permission of the sniper team leader. Given the tactical situation and the immediate threat to friendly forces, her actions were completely justified under the circumstances. Colonel Harrison held up a hand to stop the debate. Nobody is questioning whether Sergeant Gonzalez's actions were justified. The question is how we document this for the official record. The official record was proving to be problematic. How do you explain that a logistics sergeant borrowed a sniper rifle and eliminated an entire insurgent force with a single shot? The story sounded like something from a movie rather than a real military operation. Major Williams had been studying satellite imagery and intelligence reports. The more we investigate this incident, the more remarkable it becomes. The insurgent force appears to have been preparing for a major offensive against multiple coalition positions. The fuel storage they were using for their own logistics became the instrument of their destruction. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The insurgents had been stockpiling fuel for their own vehicles and equipment, and that stockpile had become their downfall when Maria's shot ignited it. What's the current tactical assessment? Colonel Harrison asked. Sir, intelligence indicates that this was a significant insurgent leadership element. Communications intercepts suggest that they were planning coordinated attacks across the province. The loss of this force has substantially degraded enemy capabilities in this sector. Maria listened to the discussion with growing amazement. She had fired one shot to help 8 Afghan soldiers, but the ripple effects had apparently disrupted insurgent operations across an entire province. Lieutenant Colonel Ahmadi provided additional context. Our sources indicate that several high-value targets were present with this force. The fire damage makes positive identification difficult, but we believe we eliminated at least 3 regional commanders. The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from environmental impact to media relations. The incident was already attracting attention from military journalists, and everyone was concerned about how to present the story to the public. Sergeant Gonzalez, Colonel Harrison finally said, you've created quite a situation for us. On one hand, your actions were tactically brilliant and saved friendly lives. On the other hand, you've accomplished something that's going to be very difficult to explain in official reports. Maria understood the dilemma. The military liked clear, straightforward explanations for tactical successes. Her story was neither clear nor straightforward. Sir, I was just trying to help the Marines complete their mission, she said simply. And you did that. The question now is what we do with you. The answer to that question came a week later. Maria found herself standing in formation as Colonel Harrison read orders promoting her to staff sergeant and transferring her to a special operations logistics unit. The transfer was unprecedented for someone with her background, but her actions had marked her as someone with unusual tactical instincts. The official citation accompanying her Bronze Star Medal with V device for valor was carefully worded. It mentioned exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions and innovative tactical thinking that resulted in the neutralization of a significant enemy force. It did not mention that she had asked to borrow a rifle or that her success had been partly due to luck. Mitchell and Davis had been awarded Army Commendation Medals for their role in the operation, and Captain Rodriguez received a Bronze Star for his leadership. The entire incident was classified at a level that ensured the full story would remain within military channels. 6 months later, Maria was serving with a special operations unit in Syria, applying her unconventional tactical thinking to some of the military's most challenging logistics problems. She had never fired the Barrett rifle again, but her reputation as someone who could think outside the box had opened doors she never expected. The fuel truck incident had become a case study taught at the Army's advanced logistics schools. Students learned about the importance of environmental awareness, tactical flexibility, and the value of diverse perspectives in combat situations. But the instructors never mentioned that it all started with a logistics sergeant who asked to borrow a rifle. The Afghan checkpoint that Maria had saved continued to operate successfully for the remainder of the war. Lieutenant Colonel Ahmadi's nephew, who had been the senior NCO at the position, eventually immigrated to the United States and attended college on a military scholarship program. He never forgot the American soldier whose single shot had saved his unit. The valley where the incident occurred remained scarred by the fire for several years. Eventually, vegetation returned, and the area became grazing land again. But satellite imagery still showed the burn patterns, a reminder of the day when one precisely placed shot changed the course of a battle. Maria kept a photo on her desk of the Barrett M82 rifle, not because she was proud of the destruction it had caused, but because it reminded her of an important lesson. Sometimes the most unlikely person in the most unexpected situation can make the most crucial difference. The story of the logistics sergeant who borrowed a sniper rifle and cleared 100 targets with a single shot became legend in certain military circles. But for Maria, it remained simply the day when she asked a simple question and got a chance to prove that courage and skill can come from the most unexpected places. Years later, when she was asked to speak at military leadership conferences, Maria always emphasized the same point. It wasn't the rifle that made the difference. It was the willingness to step up when others were counting on her. The weapon was just a tool. The real difference was made by someone who was willing to take responsibility when it mattered most. The borrowed rifle had returned to its original owner within minutes of the shot, but the impact of that moment would last for the rest of Maria's career and beyond. Sometimes asking the right question at the right time can change everything.